In April of 2015, shots were fired into the tour bus of multi-platinum rapper Lil Wayne. No one was hit, but the shots definitely seemed meant to do more than just scare the rapper, who was embroiled in a massive legal battle with his record label Cash Money at the time to the tune of $51 million. Universal Music Group had advanced Birdman and Cash Money $100 million. Young Money Records, which was Lil Wayne's sub-record label under Cash Money, in which he was the owner of 49% of, is home to Drake and Nicki Minaj, among others, but those two in particular are two of the absolute biggest pop stars of the last 10 years, and they have their own lawsuits going against Young Money, Cash Money, Universal Records, because Baby and Slim and Cash Money got that $100 million and didn't want to pay people what they had coming, or so the various lawsuits allege. Album sales for Nicki Minaj and Drake obviously were huge, and lots of money was coming in, but Universal Records was keeping that money and not kicking it to Young Money because there was still the $100 million advance tab that Cash Money owed. Not long after the April incident with the tour bus, there was an arrest made for the shooting. Alleged triggerman was a guy named PeeWee Roscoe. Now, who was PeeWee Roscoe? He was Young Thug's tour manager, and he was also a self-professed blood gang member. Jimmy Winfrey is his legal name, and phone calls from him to Birdman directly before and after the attack on Lil Wayne certainly seemed suspicious and made it look like Young Thug and Birdman were in on the crime.
You come out here and get this money, nephew.
This phone conversation was uncovered as part of a separate lawsuit by the tour bus driver, a guy named Alvin Lewis, and he was suing Birdman and Young Thug for the incident. Court documents obtained by TMZ had Alvin Lewis testifying that Birdman offered Jimmy Winfrey, aka PeeWee Roscoe, $250,000 and a Porsche to shoot up Lil Wayne's tour bus. Jimmy Winfrey, aka PeeWee Roscoe, pled guilty in November of 2015 to the attack on Wayne's tour bus. But who is PeeWee Roscoe? Turns out he was Young Thug's manager, the artist tapped by Birdman to replace Lil Wayne, who went so far as to title his album The Barter, a play on words from Lil Wayne's The Carter series, starting with a B, I guess, to represent the Bloods. Now, how did Jimmy Winfrey become Young Thug's manager? How did he get into the rap game? Another interesting story. When Clifford T.I. Harris got arrested by the feds in a sting while trying to buy a bunch of illegal guns, and he was working out a plea deal that ended up being the most lenient plea deal I've ever heard of in this type of a case. I mean, normally a convicted multiple felon buying a bunch of guns with silencers, 10 years at least, maybe 20 years. T.I. ended up with a year and a day and a bunch of community service, and part of his community service was a TV show called T.I. Road to Redemption. And on Road to Redemption, T.I. was like intervening and mentoring in some teenagers' lives in the Atlanta area who were getting into trouble. And Jimmy Winfrey, who went on to become PeeWee Roscoe, who went on to become the guy who pled guilty to shooting up Lil Wayne's tour bus, was one of the kids that T.I. mentored.
It's in your front pocket. Turn right here for me. Back up against the wall.
So through T.I., PeeWee Roscoe gets into the rap game. He ends up being Young Thug's tour manager. And on that night in April of 2015, he allegedly fires at Lil Wayne's tour bus. Now, Winfrey ended up taking a 20-year plea deal in November of 2015, but in July of 2018, the Georgia State Supreme Court threw that out, and under the grounds that Winfrey had taken a plea deal under pressure, under duress, being threatened by the judge that if he didn't take the 20-year deal, he would get a lot more time. And I looked up PeeWee Roscoe on the Georgia Department of Corrections. Right now, he's just doing a 10-year sentence for gang participation, which, again, is another tangent we'll go into sometime else. But in the state of Georgia, apparently, you can get 10 years in prison for participating in a gang, whatever that means. So PeeWee Roscoe is probably going to be out in a couple years or sooner, because he's already been in for 4 years or so now.
Tap you come out here and get this money, don't you?
Now, maybe PeeWee Roscoe will have that Porsche waiting for him, but maybe not, because Birdman's track record in paying people isn't too good.
I go to Lil Wayne. He does the song with me. And as soon as I get ready to put it out, Cash Money shut it down. They was just like, nah, you didn't get permission from us to do that. And I'm like, wow, like, is it really that serious? Like, I mean, that's kind of ugly of y'all to do that.
To understand what's going on with all this violence around Cash Money Records, you have to understand where they come from, New Orleans. New Orleans has always been one of the more dangerous cities in America, and in the 1990s, it actually peaked, achieved a rate higher than any other municipal entity in U.S. history.
And tonight, the problem of violent crime is an epidemic in New Orleans. Once again, the Big Easy is headed for a record-setting year for murders.
We're 4 and 5 times the rate of other cities. If New York City killed at our rate per capita, they'd have between 6,000 and 8,000 murders this year.
At one point, if you were a black male born in New Orleans around 1990, 1995, if the murder rate had continued at the pace it was at, you would have had a 10% chance of dying by homicide. That's the environment that Cash Money Records and No Limit Records at the same time and before it came out of.
The murder rate in New Orleans has already surpassed last year's.
New Orleans is not a town that most people think of when you say the word the Mafia, but in fact, the longtime boss of the New Orleans Mafia, Carlos Marcello, was considered by the FBI in the 60s and 70s to be the single most powerful mafioso in the entire United States. More powerful than Carlo Gambino, Genovese, anyone you might have heard of.
Yes, I'm asking you about, you're supposed to be earning money, according to the information you give the Internal Revenue, of $20,000 approximately a year, selling tomatoes. Now, where do you sell these tomatoes?
Supermarkets and grocery and fruit stands.
All right, would you tell us the last sale that you made to a supermarket?
The last sale I made?
Yeah.
I don't make sales every day. They're customer mine.
He had power over the whole American South, along with Santos Traficante out of Tampa. And in fact, Tampa Bay, Florida, and New Orleans are the 2 places in America that had Sicilian populations before New York City and had Sicilian organized crime, which grew into the Mafia. So Cash Money Records and No Limit Records, being from this violent crime capital in New Orleans, have seen, unfortunately, a lot of their artists fall victim to violence, be incarcerated for violence, like Master P's brother, C. Murder, and then also the brother of Baby and Slim Williams, the heads of Cash Money. His nickname was Gangsta, and BG of the Hot Boys was named after him, Baby Gangsta. He's been doing a life sentence for several murders for quite a long time now. In 1998, at the peak of their success, No Limit Records accounted for 15 or 20% of all black music sales in the United States. And like 1 out of 5 or 6 of all the records considered black music was sold by No Limit Records in 1998. That's how dominant they were, and Cash Money came up behind them, and New Orleans is the place they're both from. So that's an interesting melange of history right there. Everything I did, I paid my time for, Master P said. Me, I made a change. I left the thugs behind. I don't deal with them anymore. But I'll tell you something. Once you're from the street, you never get that out of your system. Recently in interviews, Master P was asked why he didn't kind of team up with Cash Money.
I could have brought Cash Money back in the days, but they was from another side of New Orleans. I'm from another side, so it never really worked. you know, because of the violence.
He had a problem being connected with the people Cash Money was connected to. Now, he never said any names or specified who that was, but I'm pretty sure it was a family named the Hanktons.
Police are investigating a brutal Uptown murder that could be linked to the city's most dangerous criminal. We're talking about Telly Hankton.
He suffered multiple gunshot wounds and died at the scene. We have learned that he is the brother of John Matthews, who testified against Telly Hankton at his last trial.
And the Hanktons are infamous in New Orleans. A guy named Telly Hankton, aka Wild Telly, and his chief hitman, Mooney Porter, a few years back were sentenced to, I think, multiple life terms for murders and drug dealing. And way back in the early 90s when Cash Money was starting, a guy named George Cup Hankton, who's now dead, DEA documents show or claim that he provided some of the startup money for Cash Money Records.
For the second time this summer, prosecutors will try Telly Hankton.
It's one of our most dangerous and wanted subjects.
Now behind bars and on trial again for murder.
The perpetrator in this case has a lot of connections, and he was known as the most wanted criminal in New Orleans area. And if we're gonna, you know, clean up New Orleans, we've got to clean up all the crime.
So stay tuned for part 2 of Surviving Cash Money. Subscribe to this channel.